I was never done. Her sister. Sorry.
Good evening, everybody. Can you hear me? Okay, good. I'm not sure this is working very well, but it's a little bit after 6, and I want to get started. We're missing one of our panelists, but we can get through the introductions and the preliminary stuff first. My name is Mary Sear, and I'm the director of the Northeast Alliance Together, which is a program that's run out of the Mattie Road Center. I'm glad everyone is here tonight. This forum has come out of work that the neighborhoods have done in terms of the Kansas City, Missouri housing policy and the affordable housing legislation and other policies that are making their way through City Hall. So we thought this would be good timing to have this group come together and discuss these topics. So tonight we're trying to engage stakeholders and local investors around issues of affordable housing that are important to the residents of the Northeast. Form a two-way understanding between the residents and developers, and also to obtain commitments from citywide stakeholders regarding their support and specific actions to be taken to increase and preserve the quality of affordable housing. So we've got tonight with us, we've got Diana Graham, the Secretary of the Likens Neighborhood Association. And she will get up first and read some background information about affordable housing that we put together. Our moderator tonight is Jordan Shealy, who is the Executive
Project
Director of Jerusalem Farm. I think I have his title wrong on the agenda. And for our panelists, over at the end, we have Jennifer Tidwell, who's the section head at the Department of Neighborhoods and Housing Services down at City Hall. And we have Angela Martorello, who is a real estate agent that specializes in dealing with low-income and new American home buyers. We have Councilman Quentin Lucas, who's also running for mayor. And we have Councilman and Mayor Pro Tem Scott Wagner, who is also running for mayor.
I'm very thirsty, apparently.
You're dehydrated.
Apparently.
Right. And then we've got our friend Todd Lieberman, who works for Brinshore Development, and he is the master developer for the Choice Neighborhoods Paseo Gateway project. So those are the people we have tonight. Like I said, we have some cards in the back. If you'd like to fill out a card with a question, we'll be collecting those. But we'll also, if you just raise your hand, we can call on you. So it's pretty flexible however you'd like to do it. And at this time, I'm going to invite Diana to come up and talk a little bit about low-income housing, affordable housing in the Northeast.
Actually, I have a theater voice, so I don't need this. So you can all hear me, right? Okay. I'm going to brag a little bit on Likens. We have a study going on. We actually have a housing committee now that we're working on things, and we came up here several months ago. And we put together on, like from all 6 of the neighborhoods, I think 5 of the 6 were represented. And we did a study, we did notes, we have a whole bunch of notes and stuff on affordable housing. What we thought it was, what we thought would fix it, and where to go with that. And then we met with the city, not very long after that, and gave our thoughts on it. So Likens is very involved. I know Indian Mound is too, but I can't speak to all the other 5 neighborhoods, but I know Likens right in there. So, but some of these, to me, some of these statistics are kind of scary, but I'm going to let you hear what I have to say. So, and you probably all know this, that across the nation, there's a shortage of quality affordable housing for low-income households. And of course, Kansas City is no exception to that. In 2010, there were about 35% of family housing units were renter occupied. However, in Kansas City, that number was 42%. In 2015, that number had risen to 46%, which is not the way we want to go, but apparently it's growing each year. So, in Kansas City, 15% of households have income below $15,000. So you know that affordable monthly housing for that group is between $250 and $375 a month. Now think about those figures, $250 a month. It's hard to get anybody to, I don't know where you would find that, I really don't. Now this only includes the rent or the mortgage and not the utilities, which again is another horror story. And a property is identified as affordable if the monthly occupancy cost, which includes rent or mortgage, in addition to utilities, is at 30% or less of their monthly income. So you can see that if we have all these income, these people with incomes that are so low that you know the demand is pretty high for affordable low-income housing. In Kansas City, 91% of renting households earning less than $20,000 a year are cost burdened by their housing, which means they spend more than 30% of their income on housing. And the number for the cost burden owner-occupied households is 76%. The other bad thing is that Kansas City's energy costs are higher than the national average. And these utility costs are not factored into those figures that I just read to you. So if a household's spending 10 to 15% of their income on utilities, that means their mortgage or rent has to be somewhere between 15 and 20%. So, you know, if you're making $100,000 a year, that might not be a burden. If you're making $15,000 a year, that's a burden. So, the undersupply of affordable housing and cost burden of low-income households is likely to even be higher than stated. So, okay. Any questions? Thank you. Oh, you have a question.
That was under 20, those households are under $20,000 annually?
Yes. Yeah.
Thank you.
I'm sorry.
No. I was just playing.
Okay, we're going to quickly just start with Jennifer Tidwell, who's going to give us a little bit of very brief background on the KCMO 5-year housing policy, which is part of the good timing of all of this. Great. Let me give you the microphone.
Jennifer wasn't in theater.
So good evening, everyone. And so I wanted to just give everyone just a little background as to how the housing policy came about. The City Council, which we are very grateful to, indicated that they wanted housing staff, or staff in the city, to begin a 5-year housing policy study. And as a result of that, my boss, John Woods, who is here today, began embarking on pulling a group of both internal stakeholders as well as external stakeholders to try to begin saying who should be in the room for this. And so those internal stakeholders were many, and as well as the external stakeholders. We did 6 neighborhood meetings across the city, in every area of the city. We had a large group of folks in the room that were raising their voices and really talked about how they felt the city should look in terms of housing. And so we had a lot of good information from the neighborhood groups. One of the big things about Northeast as they came to the table to one of our neighborhood meetings, they were asking us, well, can we actually give you guys a platform for which we would like you to look at? And so we encouraged that as we were going forward, and they did so as well. So they have been very active in this conversation, and several of their great ideas are in the policy today. So that's just kind of a little background in terms of what we did. We also sent surveys to every part of the city to get everyone's comments in terms of what they would like to see in the housing policy.
Would either of the councilmen like to comment on the policy?
Sure. My name is Quentin Lucas. I'm the City Council 3rd District at large. It's always a pleasure to be back with everybody here. The housing policy is really something that we've been talking about for a number of years, and I appreciate that staff really spent a lot of time talking to as many stakeholders as possible. Those from the tenant community, landlords, developers, those who work with housing programs, both in the government and nonprofits, to make sure that we were capturing not just the importance of maintaining housing in our community, seeing where we can create new housing, and importantly, seeing where we can do that without, or I guess, being of a good value to the city dollars that we have. And so one of the most important things I think that came out of our housing policy, and Mr. Wood has talked a lot about that, is our idea of a housing trust fund. The idea of that housing trust fund, and our goal for funding that is $75 million. The idea with the $75 million fund is to do a few different things. One is to make sure that we continue to help support minor home repair, that we continue to support neighborhoods as they exist now, so that we help avoid gentrification by saying there's a source of funding and there are opportunities for folks to stay in their neighborhoods. Also, that would give us enough funding to help build new where it's necessary, particularly infill housing, among other things. And that is really a key part. And then another thing I think that we're working on with this policy, and we talked a lot about renting, and God love renters too, but we also want to make sure we're creating opportunities for people to enter ownership. And for those who have some interest in entering into the ownership world, making sure that where we can help out with loans, lending obligations, which is something that's a challenge in the Northeast and throughout all of East Kansas City, we're creating opportunities for that. I know Mary didn't want us to talk too long on the intro, but that really is kind of the meat of what we're getting at, and we'll be sure to share more about it as time goes on.
Thank you, and I'll just add a couple of things because one, part of what's going on in our housing committee, which Councilman Lucas chairs and I'm a member of, is as we've had this discussion of policy, it's, you spend a lot of time working on a policy and then you don't do much. And so we've brought some ordinances forward to start moving, this discussion forward. But a couple of things I'll also mention, and I kind of do this because of my pre-council history when I was involved in this area, and I was on the board of Old Northeast Inc., which went defunct for a number of reasons. But part of that really shows some of the issues that we've got here. One is there's a lot of folks that invest in houses here, and then they come back and they say, hey, the codes department is on us, and we're trying to do the best we can, but it's not being helpful in getting something done. We're talking a little bit about that issue as one of the ordinances that I mentioned. There's the issue of people getting taxed out of their homes because as the values of the homes here in this area have risen. I was talking to Bobby Jo Reed the other day, and she said, I used to be able to buy homes for like, $5,000, $10,000, rehab them and put people in them. Well, now they're going for $30,000, $40,000, $50,000, and I can't do that anymore. So one of the things that we're working on, and we can get into that, and Bob Long is here, so I'm going to pick on him just for a moment. We're talking about doing some things with Chapter 353 that might be able to deal with some of those issues. The other thing, too, is many of you may know that the Healthy Homes Ordinance, that inspection ordinance, was passed. I see Sarah in the back there. You did a lot of work related to that. And as we raise the number of renters in this city, and particularly in this area, trying to have an opportunity for people to live in good homes is just as important to keep that value, not only of the home the renter is in, but in the surrounding property. So those are some of the things that we're working on, and we can get more into that. And I'll give the microphone to somebody so I don't keep talking. You might do that too. I'll give it to you. There you go.
Okay, I'm going to let Jordan come up, and we're going to just dive in here with the questions. And Jordan, go ahead. Thank you.
Yes, as Mary said, my name's Jordan Sheely. I work and live at Jerusalem Farm, and I apologize as the weather's changing, so is my voice. So I won't be offended if you're in the back and you go like this. You can't hear me. I'll try to speak loud. So yeah, my understanding is that these questions we're going to ask have been comprised from meetings that Mary had with the Northeast neighborhoods, and came up with these questions. But also, as you all are here tonight, we want to make sure we get your feedback and that your questions are also asked. And so make sure to write those down on the paper, or we'll get to a point later in the meeting where you could just raise your hand as well, and we'll ask those questions. So our first kind of question we wanted to start with, I guess anyone is welcome to answer, but we were thinking more of the developers and the real estate agents at the table. And let me find my notes. It was, what barriers exist that prevent developers in the historic Northeast from meeting housing needs for all demographics? And what strategies and resources are needed to remove those barriers? And I'll just pass the microphone around when you raise your hand, so.
Can I start?
You want to start?
Yeah, do you mind?
Okay.
I wrote notes on this one, but not the other one. I'm not going to talk after this. Hi, I'm Todd, and I work for Brincher. We're a developer that is working with Pendleton Heights, Independence Plaza, and Paseo West at implementing the Paseo Gateway. And the word barrier is a very interesting word. I looked at it for a while. I really, before we even start talking about things that are negative, I think it's important to talk about things that are really positive about the Northeast. The connections you have in terms of, you know, neighborhoods within the Northeast. You have very strong neighborhood associations. You have great access to downtown and other parts of the city. You have unparalleled neighborhoods. The bones of the neighborhoods in the Northeast are just, you know, unmatched in Kansas City. And you're starting a place right now. You're in a place right now that is, I think, you know, there will continue to be a lot of investment because this is the kind of neighborhood all around the country that people have been investing in. So then the question is, how do you maintain balanced development? How do you maintain equity in the face of investment? And I just want to talk quickly about what metric a developer looks at when he buys a house and renovates it or builds an apartment building. There's a certain amount of cost that goes into the materials, land, et cetera. It doesn't matter how much you get from a tenant, those costs are still there. So producing affordable housing is only possible in a lot of places where you have, in some cases, buildings that are in pretty good shape and the price is low, you can buy them and then rent them or sell them at a reasonable price, or where there's the interjection of funding from the outside, whether it's from government or other institutions to help write down the cost so you can rent or sell homes at an affordable rate for people. You know, I think, Mary, did you say it? I'm sorry, about the person who's buying houses for $5,000 that now has to pay $35,000. You guys look so much alike.
I know.
Mary, can I ask you another question?
Yes. Oh, yes, you can, Gloria. Go right ahead.
That's a compliment. No, but it's really true. Once your housing price and your land value rise, it's very hard to do something conventionally, just with going to a bank, getting a loan, or even pay with money with cash. So, you know, there's another phase of investment in the neighborhood, and that really is that it becomes harder to do things without assistance from the government or looking at doing something that's more expensive. I'm going to talk about two cases that we're doing really quickly, and then I'll pass along the phone, because I'm probably not going to talk again, but I might. But in one case, we bought a couple buildings near KCU and renovated them. We did it conventionally. It was buildings that were built in the early 1900s. And it was hard to do. It was hard to do because we needed to get a lender, an investor who wanted to take a chance on it. We had to take, you know, the kind of risk that was necessary to get the building done. And we had to, you know, really focus on keeping the costs down so that we could rent the buildings at a very affordable rate. And then it was done conventionally. The rents we're charging were in the 600s. That's very hard to do. The only real reason we were able to do it is because those buildings existed and the unit types of the buildings were very small. You go down the street, we're investing in some other properties throughout along Independence Avenue in Paseo, and we've looked at it a completely different way. And in that lens, we pulled down money from the federal government, from tax credits, from all different sources, so that the units are a mixture of market rate, affordable, and housing for extremely low-income folks in public housing. And that took, on average, about 7 to 8 layers of financing just to get that deal done. And again, the cost is the same as if you were building, a high-end apartment building somewhere. So, there are opportunities in historic Northeast. I guess I'm getting to where I started to do serious renovation work and new construction work. But you really have to look at the opportunities to really find homes or properties that are priced right, where the rehab's the right cost to do it conventionally, or look at outside money in my experience. So that's it.
I'll take that.
Thanks.
Thank you. So for those of you who don't know me, I'm Gloria Fisher, and I work in the affordable housing arena. So I work at I'm always working to try to figure out how to keep affordable housing alive in Kansas City. So like Todd said, there's a lot of really great things about the Northeast, the location, proximity next to downtown. I know you've gotten a few more bus lines that are coming through here that really helps. Potentially there could be a streetcar down Independence Avenue one day, and I think that's entirely still on the radar for what could happen in the Northeast. And it's the ability to get from Northeast to jobs downtown is pretty inexpensive, as well as the proximity is very close. So he's right about that. There's a lot here. You're developing more and more each day, and so it feels like there's good bones to start to continue to move east as Todd's work's been, and my work right now is in Pendleton and Scarrett and some up Paseo West, but we're moving further east all the time, and that's how we see it happening, is to continue to go east. And we do have, it's a similar problem that we have in the urban core all over the place, which is just, like Todd said, money versus what it would take to fix a home, what you can rent it for, or what a person could buy it for, and then where the gap is. So for instance, I have a house that's in the Likens neighborhood that was donated, and it will cost me $150,000 to rehab it. And it's in an affordable manner. It'll look good. Somebody won't have any problems for 15 years in a home like that, and outside of something godly happy. But I can't sell it for that, and nobody can buy it for that. So I have to do it with some kind of program, whether it's a home program or whatever that we might be able to do with. And when we do that, then it gets set aside for only a person that makes 80% of median income that's trying to get into a home for some $130,000, $125,000. And that's really hard, and wants to live in that home in that neighborhood. So it's a hard needle in the haystack to find. So we're constantly up against that. How do we bridge that gap? How do we come up with new ideas? So one of the things that Westside's doing is we're trying to do we started with a workforce development crew. So we trained 20 people in property maintenance. And what we hope to be able to do is reduce the cost by having people that were paying through a grant paint or fix things. And we partner with Jerusalem Farms a lot too when we have certain problems. We still continue to do the minor home repair program, and that is probably one of the best programs that Kansas City has, and it continues to fund all the time. Because when you do have a roof that's out and you can meet the 80% of median income, we can come in and fix it. Whether it's siding, if it's windows, something that's $10,000, $12,000, we can come in and fix that. And the city continues to fund that year after year, and we really are glad that they do. It affords us to do about 25 homes, and we can all agree that 25 is just a drop in the bucket of what needs to be done. But we'll continue to do that. So some homes that are here that we can save, we'll save through minor home repair, so that they can families can continue to live in them. And then we're going to continue to look at other ways of doing rehabbing where we can keep the costs down, so that it's still affordable when we're done with it, but it is a nice place to live.
So one of the
questions on your list is how can we encourage the development of more mixed income housing in communities? And I think one of the big ways to do that is to work with the community development organizations that you already have in place here. It is known throughout the country that if you have community development corporations in the neighborhood, that they always keep these housing units affordable. And they're in it for the long term. So any way that you can encourage and support your community development organizations, it is important that you do so. And then in addition to that, encourage them to partner with developers so that they can scale what they're doing. So that's one of the big things that I would ask you to take away.
Wonderful segue into our second question there. So I'm relatively new to Kansas City myself, but it's pretty quick to see that Kansas City is pretty segregated in areas of housing. In the Northeast, I think we have a pretty diverse community here in many ways. But how can we, I know you all touched on this in the first question, but are there any other thoughts on how we can encourage development of more mixed income housing in communities in Kansas City?
Plug something so the councilmen don't have to. So in Charlotte, Charlotte just set aside $75 million for their housing trust fund. Washington D.C. is putting over $100 million a year into housing. LA, San Francisco, New York, you know, they're all seeing what Kansas City is beginning to experiencing. And that is that cities are becoming unaffordable to people who are the heart and soul of the city. People that work every day and that may not find their rents affordable because they're being pushed out by more and more people coming in. So I think increase the amount of support for organizations like Gloria's and the work we do to help write down the rent and the production of ownership for low and moderate income people would be really important.
Well, since you gave it to me. It's your fault, no.
Are you supposed to say that?
No. Here's what it boils down to in many respects. It's very difficult to do something at scale when you do not have enough equity or third-party money that can come in. Trying to do things on a grand scale with infill housing, for example, is difficult. I kind of use the example with land bank of we're doing things one or two lots at a time, yet if we are thousands of affordable housing units short, you will never get anywhere that people will notice. So what do? One is you have to have the funds and have the funds at a scale that you can actually see something. The other thing, though, I think, is you actually have to be able to get control of enough property to do something. So, just taking what's going on with Paseo Gateway, we're talking about large pieces of property, whether it's the Pendleton Flats property, the stuff over at 8th and Paseo, even what we're trying to do in the Northland for replaceable units. You've got to have a certain bit of scale. So to answer the question, I think it boils down to control of sites and funding availability. And the other thing I'll just say about sites, just for a moment, because I know you experience this, as does every other part of the city, there's only so much property that the city controls through land bank, through our homesteading authority, and so on. And yet that is just scratching the surface of all the other property that you see. And whether it's because someone is paying the taxes from Paris or Australia or wherever they happen to come from, and I know there are people from those areas that, or whether they are in Overland Park or somewhere else in Kansas City, it is clear that there are people who are not taking care of their property and sometimes are sitting on them, waiting for them to appraise higher, so now they become more valuable and they go sell them to someone else. So that is part and parcel with this issue as well.
Because it's coming down the line, just to remind you of the question, What can we do? This is the one that connects to more mixed income housing and communities. And I'll start with this. I was recently learning about kind of development strategies in Denver, a city that is interested in lots of ways. They've passed the housing trust funds. They're doing good things. But one of my concerns was when the question was asked, what can you do? Their answer was, well, we're investing in transit so that people who live an hour away can get to town faster or something of that sort. I never want that to be the Kansas City solution. What we need to make sure is that neighborhoods like the Northeast provide different income level opportunities, and I think that's essential really for us to be a strong city and one that works. So to take it a different tack, everything they said was correct. I think I'll go with the idea, and this was another part of our housing policy, is that we can't do things that make things worse. We need to look, for example, at our land use policies, our planning and zoning stuff, right? And sometimes it can be boring and I won't get in too deep, but a lot of our policies sometimes, and particularly in some more far-flung parts of the city, is to build large tracts, build big housing tracts. You can have larger houses. We're not supporting walkability. We're not supporting smaller housing. We're not actually supporting some of that density that we need to help build a community. So the first thing I think that we need, and we see this on a list somewhere, but it relates to a nexus study, just a fancy word for, we need a holistic study that looks to how are we developing housing in Kansas City and how do our policies work with it. You know, one other thing you hear about in the newspaper or the press a lot is incentive policy. How do we tie more of our incentives to projects that are like Todd's, that have mixed income, that have different opportunities, that are built right on streets where we really want to make sure we're developing, as opposed to building projects that may be building multifamily housing but are increasing a glut of multifamily luxury options, let's say on the Country Club Plaza. God bless the plaza, it's a wonderful place. It's not necessarily a place where we need heavy incentive activity. And I'm proud because frankly over the last several years we've seen council move away from that. And so I think really being intentional in our policies and making sure that we recognize that we want to build neighborhoods that are holistic, neighborhoods that have walkability, neighborhoods where we're saying, look, we're not just going to build housing here and then leave you far away from the nearest bus route or the nearest store or anything of that sort. Instead saying, how can we tie all of that good development to one? Yeah, no,
We're still back.
we've cheated.
Angela, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot here.
No,
But
I'm ready for it.
yeah, so I know that you are a real estate agent and you work with a diverse group of home buyers, and I'm just curious in regards to these questions, what are some of the opportunities that you see with some of your clients, and also some of the barriers or some of the struggles that you find in finding housing for them?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you. So I am a real estate agent. I do a lot of business in the Northeast and all over the metro area, particularly with refugee immigrant families, working class folks, all first-time home buyers. And I think that they are a really hidden market that isn't really considered when we're talking about any of these issues. These are folks who may be living in subsidized housing or public housing, or they're living in to be honest, some of the worst rentals in our city.